very much, Taylor. Next slide. That's me. Next slide. So a disclaimer for everybody, nothing that I say during this short presentation is to be attributed to the Director of National Intelligence or any intelligence agency, as I am also under an NDA with those entities. I will not be sharing any information about cases I worked on when I was an intelligence officer. Next slide. Okay, topics of discussion. This is a interesting guideline, Guideline D. Its roots are a little unseemly in that it dates back to the time where there was during the McCarthy era, there was a targeted effort against homosexuals in particular and lesbians within the federal government. If you were what we now call LGBTQ plus, back then you could not work for the federal government. You couldn't have a security clearance because your sexual status was considered an intrinsic disorder. You were considered unstable and having bad judgment. And if you were found out, you were at that point virtually unemployable because people would find out why you were fired by the federal government. That's where Guideline D got started. And then it got applied in the military as sexual mores loosened up in the 1960s. If you were found to have conducted moral turpitude as an officer or as an enlisted person in our services, if you cheated on your wife, and then later if you cheated on your woman, your husband, but women came into the military as full partners so late that these rules were on the way out at that point. But moral turpitude could be used to deny you a clearance as well. That all changed and shifted and started in 1992, but 2012 was the big year, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Structure of the regulations, Seed 4 has all the guidelines located in them. You should read a copy of Seed 4 if you are a current clearance holder every year, and you should get it. It's a DNI's directive. It is the document which is the touchstone for every agency's security regs. It's easily read. It's actually a quick read, and it's the rules to which you will be held to if you're an applicant, or which you're currently being held to if you hold a clearance. Reading Seed 4 should help you cut through a lot of the water cooler chat and, frankly, a lot of the evasion by security officers. The security officers are in a tough spot. They like to give you more information, but they're also in the enforcement mode as well. So they're always being very careful about what they say to you because they don't want to get into discussions necessarily that require them to take an action against you. So read Seed 4 on a regular basis. It's very important. In there, each guideline is broken into what presents the problem and what mitigates the problem. You got to read those two parts very carefully, and we'll talk about Guideline D in a minute. The key thing to understanding this guideline is to understand that we're moving away from lifestyle. Okay, the federal government really doesn't care what you do in your off time. In your off time, no sex in the office, please. Guarantee loser in these cases, and I've had quite a few of those. But by and large, what you do, as long as it's consensual, non-criminal, and I would add to that, not recorded. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Am I back? I'm back. Sorry about that. So as long as what you do is consensual, non-criminal, and not recorded, then you're going to be in good shape, okay? Non-recorded is not in the regulation, but it's very important because the recording of intimate acts, even if it's legal, could be used to blackmail you or push you into a position where you would divulge classified information. So we're not going to look so much at lifestyle post 2012 as we look at whether you're leverageable, whether you can be pushed by the FSB or WASP in Cuba or Chinese intelligence to leak classified information because they have the goods on your sexual conduct. So that means recordings of any type are bad. Prostitution is illegal as far as the federal government's concerned. Doesn't matter if it's legal in the country of the hooking. If you're engaging in a prostitute, you're going to have trouble. That also means that all the games people play. No, it wasn't prostitution. I took her out to dinner. I paid for her dinner. Yes, we did have a one-night hookup, and I paid her $600 for the cab home. That's prostitution. And now security's going to be thinking, well, he's lying to me because that $600 for the cab was really, payment for the sex. So it's those sorts of things that become difficult. Prostitution's a problem overseas because almost every bordello outside this country is wired by some intelligence service to take pictures. They get you in the act of making the double-backed beast, as Shakespeare used to refer to it, and then they're going to try to use that to leverage you. So let's talk. So let's move to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? There you go. I want to remind people that in national security law, this area we're talking about, which is number 39 on this list, this is from a popular treatise on national security law. That's the tiny area we're dealing with. Everything else in that table of contents, from 1 through 8 there on the left-hand side, and then those little sections below, everything else is the rest of national security law. So what you think is a large matter, a big deal, it's your clearance, in the overall review of our national security needs, personnel security is significant. There's 2.8 million roughly security clearance holders. But by and large, it's a tiny fraction of the overall work that's done at national security law. Next slide, Taylor. So this is our forms of access. You want to always keep this in mind that the federal workplace is a pyramid effect. People given less and less access the higher you go or the closer you go to our classified information. Everybody must have a credential, even people who don't work on the facility. So if you're the HVAC repair person coming in to check the fan unit, you're going to have a badge of some sort. It's easy to get a badge relatively. We see a few of these proceedings, not many. The next up, is public trust. These are many federal positions. Almost all of them are conducted on a security clearance-like review basis, but the standards aren't as high. Then the topic of this discussion, a clearance, that's the SF-86 process, the background interview and adjudication if you have to go through it. And then above that are the SAPs, the special access programs, which are sort of a different kettle of fish. And then there's actually probably a little ray sticking out of the top of that pyramid. I can't give you the exact number because that's classified, but the SAPs get fewer and fewer the higher you go, the smaller number of people have access to them. Next slide, Guideline D overview. So as I was saying earlier, you want to look to liability, not lifestyle. And I'll give you some recent case examples, which are public and you can look them up. We had a victory over at the Defense Department for a client who had a diaper fetish. Okay. I didn't know much about diaper fetishes when I took this case. As with most Guideline D cases, they gave it to the old man because everybody else was like, what do we do with this? And our client was a very sincere, very competent, very expert person. The interest that he had was wholly personal. There was no partner involved. It was all within the 4 walls of his house. There was no recording, no taping. DCSA tried to cast it as pedophilia, and because of the diapers presence. And we went to a full-blown hearing at the Defense Office of Hearing Appeals, and Judge Rivera agreed with our rationale that this was just an innocent pastime. That probably would have been unheard of 40 or 50 years ago in my father's Navy. We had a different sort of social perspective in our country. But that decision opened the way in the Defense Department to look at these issues as not critiquing somebody's lifestyle, but looking at liability. And the bottom, analysis of this whole thing, even if that diaper fetish was to be filmed in some sort of way, the client wasn't blackmailable. The client was completely open with his family members about it, and everybody knew about it, and that was that. Really great case. Another one over at the National Security Agency involved BDSM. This would have been considered a fetish 50 years ago. My client had to go through a grueling session in front of 8 senior officials at the National Security Agency, all of which were pretty straight people, not a lot of excitement in their social lives. My client was calm, he was cool, he was collected, um, and he was very thoughtful. And his partner was his spouse, and she provided a declaration as well. And it was consensual, it was non criminal. It was considered not to be a reflection of any sort of behavioral mental health issues. And to my shock, NSA approved the clearance. It was a great day. We had another case at NSA which was just as interesting. I'm going to talk around this one a little bit, but it was an individual who engaged in Guideline D activities that would still be problematic. It involved a legal brothel in Nevada, but it was with a spouse. Uh, but what saved him in that case, which I think fits into this general discussion, was that he had disclosed it all to security ahead of time. And as we didn't even have to go to a hearing. They went through the statement of reasons because we pretty much flagged for him that security knew about this and then approved it. I don't know if it hadn't been disclosed to security whether he would have won. I do think he would have been okay now, except for the prostitution angle, because you got to remember that three agencies in particular, FBI, NSA, and CIA, are very hell-bent that prostitution is a counterintelligence risk. So that one is still a red line zone. Next slide, Taylor. All right, so this is, for those of you who have seen my other webinars, this is my wheel of life when it comes to guidelines. You should read guideline seed 4 with all the guidelines every year. And if you start with the one at the top, guideline A at the beginning, and move clockwise around the wheel here, you can see that they're organized in a way that makes a lot of sense. Allegiance to the United States is one that is the very beginning of security clearance reviews. This is the Oppenheimer case, for those of you who've seen that movie. B and C are about your ties to foreign princes, is the phrase, enemies of the state. And then D, E, G, and H. Well, no, D, G, and H, and I all share the basic structure that if there's a problem, you need somebody to present evidence to say you're okay. Or if there's a security concern, we'll say it that way. So if you, for instance, there's a domestic violence question and a sexual behavior question after an incident, and you come to me, I'm going to say, I need you to connect with a doctor who can review whether you have a sex addiction. Okay. And the doctor needs to produce an evidence and say, no, you don't have a sex addiction. And that's really tough to ask a client for that when they know they don't have it, but we need the proof they don't have it. And you saying you don't have a sex addiction does not mean that it's the case. But when you have a professional say it, yes, it does mean it's the case. Personal conduct and financial are about your decision-making abilities, your good judgment. That's why they're sort of in this personal attribute section of the wheel. And then financial, alcoholic, and drug, alcoholic, drug, and psychological. Those are all guidelines you would need outside evidence for. And then you get into the criminal and the handling classified information, hardcore counterintelligence concerns with J, K, L, and M. So D is in the category of those where your behavior is in question. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about seed 4 already, and we talked about guideline D, so we can go to the next slide. We talked about past cases. I'm ahead of myself. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so current liabilities and assets in this field. I'm seeing a lot of cases of guideline D cases involving men under age 45. There's an uptick in this, and I'm hearing from the security officers that there are more of these than ever before. I had never heard of a female having a prostitution matter in the security file. I have been told by one security office they have 2 of those cases right now. It's mostly males, and from what I can see, as we tighten the rules of engagement on campus in society. Concept of date rape was refined. We started holding people accountable for their behavior. My just spitballing of this issue is I think men started going and paying for sex the old fashioned way and doing it on vacation in the Caribbean. And this has then led to the issue of foreign contacts. You go in on a polygraph, you disclose it, and then you have to justify why you were breaking the law in a foreign jurisdiction. Doesn't matter whether it's legal in the Dominican Republic or not. Doesn't matter if it's legal in Amsterdam or not, or in Thailand, or in Phuket. The bottom line, it's illegal in the United States from the federal government's perspective, just like marijuana. And so if you're paying for it, this is going to be a problem for your clearance. So you want to watch out for tourism-based sex, including one-night stands and resorts overseas. Behavior that could be confused with domestic violence. There was a trend starting about 5 years ago, and my last case was about a year ago, where young people were choking their partner in active sex in order to enhance the orgasm. Okay, there are all these choking cases. And all these young men choking young women, and then the young women would panic and call police, and then you got a police call, and then you end up with a security review. And after a while, we were able to get to the core, understanding here that people were reading this on the internet. Here's how to have sex: choke your partner, and your partner will have, a greater orgasm. So how security deals with this is really complicated, because you don't want to have a practice that promotes a situation where particularly women have to call police in the middle of an act of sex because the behavior has crossed the line. So you really have to, if you want a job with a security clearance, you got to go back to the sort of basics of what people are not taught in regards to their relationships with others. So my rules for my people when I was a federal executive: no sex on the first date. Sorry, folks. Going out on a date, I'd have somebody stop by. Hey, Mr. Meyer, I did get that date with Sally. And I tell my investigator straight up, no sex on the first date. No, don't do it. Bad idea. Now, that may mean that Sally would not be interested in my special agent. Well, that's too bad. There's a lot of Sallys out there, probably 300 for every individual. There's 300 people who could be the one. And if Sally's not willing to wait, then fine, that you still have your clearance. It's too risky to go and have sex on the first date. I know that sounds really conservative, but it really is the smartest thing to do. I used to tell my people to ask for the intimacy before taking it, right? Don't assume anything. If you can't have a candid conversation with your partner before having sex, you shouldn't be having sex with them. And then it sounds really bad because we have this sexist view in our society that, sometimes men are supposed to pick up the cost for the, dinner and the cabs and all the entertainment of the night. It's dangerous for people with security clearances. So, I'd be upfront with your dinner partner saying, I know we're going back to your place after this and there might be a moment of intimacy, but can we split the cost of dinner? It will protect my clearance. That's just the way things should be. It sounds awfully conservative, but it really is what keeps you protected from an adjudication of your clearance. Next slide. All right, so for C3, which is the reporting requirement, I throw this in there to give you an idea of where you fit in the larger picture of things. And that is that the information you provide about your activities allows security to decide whether you're going to be an internal threat that opens their door to an external threat. That's all this slide is meant to convey. And so you have to understand that this is not about critiquing your private life. It's about the federal mission of protecting classified information. Next slide. The questions. Before we go to questions, I want to flag for you, on Amazon Prime last night, I watched a great movie called Jack Strong, made in Poland. There's subtitles. Sorry, you got to read subtitles. There's a little bit of English in it. But it's about a spy in the Polish army who was developed in the movie by CIA. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a DIA asset. Some of the historical chronology is a bit off in the movie, but it's an excellent presentation of what your security officer is thinking about regarding the behavior of you and your peers in the workplace. So if you want to see how a counterintelligence expert views life watch this film and watch the counterintelligence people from the Soviet Union and from the Polish army as they try to figure out who the spy is. And they completely screwed it up. And then on Jack Strong's side, that's his code name, look at the pressure he's under as he's operating as a spy. And all of his behaviors at some point wander through guidelines A through M. And it's a really great tutorial. So that's my movie recommendation. Any questions, Taylor?
Yeah, there's a couple of pre-submitted that I'm going to send over to you right now. If anybody has any additional questions, please submit them via the chat.
Oh, I have a chat question here. I got to find it. There it goes. All right. The question is how to navigate garnering letters of recommendation for current civilian and military employers to support mitigating conditions under Guideline D without harm. Hey, this is the hardest thing in any adjudication. Same with foreign contacts. You should have at any time 4 to 7 people on your Rolodex who will speak about you and for you, regardless of the circumstances. You don't necessarily have to be civilian or military employers. They can be people in the community. Sometimes that's best because you're going to have to show the statement of reasons. And this is pretty awkward stuff. I had a client come in and his mother was going to pay the retainer. And what that young man had to share with me, and we won the security aspects of that case. I just could not imagine me sharing that with a third party in front of my mother. So part of the problem, if you're having reservations about this, is that what they're looking for is embarrassment. If you can be embarrassed, you can be leveraged. All right. Foreign intelligence service can come after you through your embarrassment. But if you just put it out there and you have no problems with it, then that shows you can't be leveraged. So you want to find people you can trust. They don't have to necessarily be in the workplace. And you're going to have to show them that statement of reasons. It really stinks. My apologies for that. How much time is required to have passed since a Guideline D infraction to be a successful mitigating factor? So mitigation through recency, that's the fake word. It doesn't exist in any dictionary. It's only in a federal regulation. Recency is wholly at the discretion of the security officer. So what I tell my clients is get an assessment from a sex therapist that says you're perfectly all right and you don't have a sex addiction. Okay. And that's going to be like a 5 to 6 page assessment, and it costs money. They're expensive. But once you have that, that almost proves recency in and of itself. If an expert says you don't have a problem and 8, 9 months have passed, then security is going to be able to walk away from that and show their boss a document that says that you don't have a problem. Next one, how do domestic violence situations play into Guideline D? So domestic violence is usually called in by either a bystander or the woman. I haven't seen many with men. I've seen 1 or 2 of those. I've seen men on men situations as well. So if it's associated with an act of intimacy, then it's going to be triggering not only Guideline J, because police were called criminal conduct, but also Guideline D. So if a woman makes a domestic violence call after an act of sex where she was punched or bitten, even if the man thought it was agreed to consensual play, it's going to trigger Guideline D and Guideline J, and the adjudicators are going to rely on the police report to sort out what was going on. In that situation, a statement from the woman, sometimes authorities are called in a panic, can sometimes resolve that issue. Now, there's one big carve out for that. I've had a number of Guideline D cases that were rapes. Okay, I almost had to set up a hearing from a state penitentiary because the person was incarcerated in the middle of our adjudication. If you've committed a rape as a federal applicant or federal employee, you're in trouble. I mean, in the bottom line, you've got to sort something else out. Got to sort out your recompensation to society, and you've also got to figure out what's going on inside your head. You need an assessment. it's going to be very tough to hold a clearance. Is consensual sex in a private sex club or a private group event problematic as long as you are not trying to hide it? That under the new guidelines, that should be okay. I just caution you with the group aspect, that's getting close to recording, okay? And recordings can be used to leverage. So if your private sex club, there's nobody who would be horrified that you were a member of a private sex club, and so you wouldn't be embarrassed if that knowledge was known, then you should be okay with that. It's on the line, but if that case comes up, we'd love to have it here at the law firm, because that would be the next step in our diaper fetish and BDSM line of cases. And what if a video recording is fully consensual and is produced in order to demonstrate that consent has been followed? Still not a fan. You're going to have to prove the concern on security side. If you're leverageable, even if it's consensual, if there are body image issues, okay. I had a pornography case. When the porn finally got to me, it was big people porn. It was like 300 pounds or over. And the question that came up on the security side is that if that's leaked, is that person going to be embarrassed that they are out there 300 pounds and it's porn? And then you're going to have to get an assessment from a doc that says you would not be embarrassed by that. That starts to get to be a really complicated evidence pattern. So I'm still not a fan of documentation and recordings contemporaneous with the act. And as far as consent, whomever you're having sex with should be able to sign out a declaration of support saying that it was consensual. I've seen a number of those. So that's what you should be looking at, is the person you're having sex with should be able to back you 6 or 8 months later. And if that person wouldn't, then you shouldn't be having sex with that person. Sorry, it sounds kind of prudish, Dr. Ruth. So I think that's the end of our questions, right, Taylor?
Yes, those are all of our submitted questions.
All right. Well, we're here for everybody if you need us. We've had a number of successes in this field, and I think the Defense Department in particular and the National Security Agency are getting where we need to be, which is policing the counterintelligence issues, not policing people's bedrooms.
Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and thank you, Dan, for presenting. Today's webinar was recorded and a copy will be sent to all attendees later this week. I hope everyone has a good rest of their night, and thank you for joining.